welcome back to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari. And we're super blessed to have DeAnna L'am with us today, who's on a European tour. She's just flown in from France to London. DeAnna L'am is a womb visionary. She spent her life working with women to guide them through the wisdom of their cycles. And particularly now, this time in her own life, she's focusing on menopause as a spiritual journey. So welcome to you, DeAnna.
I'm delighted to be here, Shakti. Thank you for having me here and connecting together.
Yeah. I'm really excited because I found you actually from my own personal seeking, because I've just got into this stage of my life.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know for you how this focus upon women's cyclical nature, where did that focus come for you?
Gosh, it started over 25 years ago when I was traveling and found in a health food store a reusable menstrual kit where with cloth pads. And I remember reading the leaflet, and the woman said there, since she started using the reusable pad, she started loving her cycle. And I thought, yeah, right. I didn't believe it for a moment, but I got the set and I decided to try it because everything was working beautifully for me in my life at that point. I was professional, I was working with groups, I was happily married to my husband of 27 years now. And once a month I became a basket cake. I didn't have any physical pain or physical symptom, but I was going into irritability and emotional roller coaster. And I knew that something had to be discovered, that women were not designed to suffer. So that was my opening when I first came across the reusable menstrual cloth pads. And that opened up the stream for me of consciousness, because then I started researching what menstruation was considered in indigenous cultures, and I found wealth of wisdom in indigenous cultures around the world about menstruation. Mm-hmm. And it took about a year of coming to know symptoms myself and settling into really embracing my menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. Until I decided to start offering it to other women.
Mm-hmm. That's really fascinating. I just want to go back a bit and ask, so before this, were you already working with embodiment or therapy or group facilitation in some way?
I worked as a group facilitator, mostly in conflict resolution. I was trained in conflict resolution. I come from Israel, and I worked with Jews and Palestinians on reconciliation. I also trained in family and relationship reconciliation, so I worked with couples. I had a private practice with couples and with groups. And I went into workplaces and organizations to look at conflict resolution, mediation, and bridge building in groups, in teams. So all of that, so my work with groups and with people was already in place, but I never thought I'd work with women only. And what I realized when the changes in my life were profound, and when women started asking me what changed for me because the change was visible, I realized that there are many mediators and conflict resolution people that do a lot of good work, but that there's no one that's doing any work on menstruation. So little by little I started moving the center of gravity of my work to women's work until it became the whole of my work.
Mm-hmm. So you said that the changes in you were visible.
Yes.
So from that moment where literally you saw this kit, what began to change? What was it?
So I realized that in indigenous cultures, the time of menstruation is considered to be the time when the veil between the worlds is thinnest, when we have access to the divine, to the spirit world in a way that when we don't menstruate, we do not have. And that we need to move inward, we need to replenish, and we can access our intuition and inner guidance when we bleed in a way that otherwise is not accessible to us. But in order to do that, we have to take time. We can't be taking care of children and working and doing chores and being all over the place and divine. It just does not work. So what I discovered is that as soon as I closed the door and I took time off for myself at the day before my period and the first day of my period, my irritability completely stopped. And why was that? Because there was no one to be irritable with. So I wasn't in conflict with anyone. My husband and I were not in each other's face. And I realized that the irritability was really a message to stop, to not continue to engage, to stop and withdraw and go inward. And ever since I started doing that, I realized that I was replenished every month and guided and renewed in a way that I could surface again and be myself again, and that all the conflict that I had before was really a symptom. It was not something that women have to suffer by design, but it was a symptom to call me back in. So that's mostly what changed, is that I started to live my expansion and contraction. I started living my rhythmic cyclicity, which we all are designed to do, which we are all hardwired to live as women, and which in indigenous cultures was the rhythm of life, and we have lost that. So we can each find it for ourselves in our lives on a regular basis. So that was the main thing that changed.
So I want to ask what that meant practically for you. Did you literally go into a room and shut off all contact with your work, with your beloved, with your children or friends, or what did that look like?
Yes, yeah, I literally did. I was fortunate enough at that point we didn't have a child, we do now. We didn't have a child, so it was just my husband and I, and he was extremely supportive, and the more he realized that I am renewing myself and that I'm coming up refreshed, the more he realized how it would benefit him to really let me have my space, because it benefited both of us in our relationship. So I was fortunate enough, because I worked for myself, that I was able to do that. But women often ask me, so what if I can't? What if I'm a single mom? What if I'm working 9 to 5? I can't take the whole day. So I always like to think of taking time as a homeopathic dose. You don't have to take the whole time. You can take lunch break. If you're in a 9 to 5 situation, take lunch break away from people. Go walk in the park. Just close the door and be by yourself for a half hour, for an hour. If you're a single mom at home, get up 10 minutes before everyone else in your family in the morning and light a candle and just be with yourself inward, realizing that this is not a day like any other day. It will give a tone to the day that's different. So yes, taking the whole day, or like they did in indigenous cultures, taking the 3-4 days of your menstrual cycle off would be ideal, but we can't always do it. So I really want to encourage women not to do all or nothing. To either, if you can't take 3 days, take nothing. No, if you can't take that, take an hour, take a half a day, take 10 minutes, but whatever you can take, so that you are signaling to yourself and to your psyche that this is an inward time. This is time for you. Even if it's 10 minutes, it's time for you. So.
Yeah, so, gosh, again, more questions just sparking off that. So then, you said you noticed a big difference, people around you noticed a big difference. What was that physically, and what was that physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Because you talk about the spiritual dimensions of this, which, again, some people might not, like menstruation, spirituality.
So I'm going back to the indigenous wisdom of the veil thinning between the spirit world and the world of phenomena when we menstruate. So once I allowed myself to take time, I went into meditation, my intuition heightened, the guidance, however you want to call it, spiritual world or inner guidance, it doesn't matter what words we use, but if we allow ourselves to shut off, even for a short time every month, the world, then there is a wealth of information inside, there is a wellspring that we can go into. So I started feeling able to be guided to make decisions in a way that was informed from my depth and not from my head. I was able to take time every month and to release the month that has gone by, to shed the skin like a snake, all the emotional build up from the previous month, to let that go and to renew and open up and prepare for the new month. So all of this is, to me, a spiritual realm. It's not an intellectual realm. It's not a head realm. It really is a way of the body and spirit to kind of align and take space, expand, and receive guidance from within.
I'm wondering, on behalf of women who might watch this, who will say to you, you know, I have chronic PMT, I get awful headaches, cramps, you know, anger, all of those symptoms that people talk about. What would you say to them in terms of the process?
So in my experience, women that I worked with that started taking time, that started listening to their body, that started honoring themselves and their cyclicity and their blood, their symptoms from month to month dissipated until they disappeared. So the most dramatic story was a woman that I worked with on the phone from Australia, who, when she came to me, she was on 5 painkillers per day, every day of her cycle, of her period. She tried everything. She tried allopathic medicine, she tried homeopathy, she tried herbs, she tried acupuncture, everything under the sun. And some things worked for a little bit, but not for long, and some things didn't work at all. So eventually she was so much at the end of her rope that she realized that it has to be an emotional component to this, because she covered all the physical ones.
Right.
So we started working together, and what I do when I work with women, other than teach them how to take time and to start to revere their cyclicity, is to delve into the time of our first period. So it is my belief that the first period, our menarche, is the kernel of our relationship with our cyclicity, with our blood, with our femininity, our body image, our self-esteem. All of that is being born in the day of our first blood. And for most of us around the world, that day was alone, painful, shameful for many. There was lack of information, there was embarrassment, there was confusion. And that's what we keep on recreating in our PMT, PMS, and in our symptoms. So the more, this woman that I worked with, we worked once a week on the phone, and after 3 months she was down from 5 painkillers a day to 1, and it was another month and she didn't need any more painkillers at all. So what I say to women who suffer is that their suffering is not a requirement. Those sufferings are painful, but we don't have to continue to have them. It's not a force of nature. It's not a rainstorm that we have no control over. We really can heal, and those symptoms, physical and emotional, are really a compass that shows us that something is really out of balance. And if we can listen to that and start doing the emotional work of healing our relationship with our blood, with our body, with our femininity, mostly from the root of the first blood, then it is my experience that those symptoms are fully dissipating, as mine, which weren't physical but emotional, dissipated fully.
So that's fascinating. So what I'm hearing you say is it's not really about needing to take medicine, needing to do womb yoga or an exercise or a particular meditation. It's really just about inner listening.
Yes. And healing the relationship that we have with our femininity, with our body, with our blood. And specifically, I do a lot of healing with women around the first blood. There is, it's amazing to me how women share stories with each other about everything, about their first sexual encounters and about rape and abuse and about recovery and triumphs. And through all of that, the story of the first blood usually is silent. We don't tell this story. It's still buried in the recesses of our psyche. So just speaking that story, just bringing up those memories of the time of the first blood, the actual day or memories around that, and starting to do work with what was there, starting to unravel and unpack the pain that we've been carrying since that time is what the healing begins with, and what is the road to recovery.
So leading on from that, well, I've held some women's circles myself, and what shocked me when I was doing that some years ago was I thought that since I began my periods many years ago when I was 11, I thought things would have shifted, but when I sat in a circle of women of all ages from their 20s to their 50s, almost every single story, because we did that sharing, was a negative experience, and I was shocked. I thought things had changed. So do you work with red tents or
Yeah, and I want to say that my experience is identical to yours across the board. I teach in many countries in Europe, I teach in Israel, I teach in Latin America, in many countries. Wherever I've been in the globe, almost every single story is painful, negative, and hardly ever been told. It often is the first time that this story is ever told. So it really is what convinced me that this is not only the root of the healing, but it is also what connects us as women across all divides. So, I come from Israel, and I sat in circles there with Jewish and Arab women, and there are chasms between Jewish and Arab women of religious, political nature, belief system, upbringing, well, you name it. But as soon as we start telling the stories of our first blood, and as soon as we start connecting around our cyclicity, all of these differences melt and dissolve and disappear, because underneath it all, we can share and we can relate to each story because they are so similar, not in detail, but in feelings.
I'm just wondering, this is very much a woman's story, and I will ask more about that, but what is the importance of your work for the men in the world?
So that's an excellent question. Men are partners of women and fathers of daughters, and their lack of information is equal to ours, if not more. I would say that usually in women's studies or in women's issues, we're much more educated than a lot of men, but in this case, it's hardly the case. So we don't know much more about our blood and its significance to us than men do. So the need to educate and to rediscover is immense for both ourselves as women and for men, because once they start realizing the gift of cyclicity, the gift of expansion, contraction, the need of women to go inward in order to emerge renewed, they can support their partners, they can support their daughters, and they can also support their boys, because their boys need supporting and mentoring from boyhood to manhood as much as the girls need support from the women from their transition from girlhood to womanhood.
So just following on from that, I mean, there's, as much as there is this sort of shame that's quite endemic in culture for women, there's also, one thing I guess I would notice as a cultural paradigm is when women speak about this, men will quite often say, oh, not that, or oh, she's having this, oh, she gets really grumpy then. So how can we change that understanding and that paradigm in a mutually respectful way?
So we need to start with ourselves, and when we start realizing that we need. We don't, it's not a deserve, we need. We deserve as well as deeply need on a soul level to withdraw and to renew ourselves. And when we speak with our partners about that, then the grumpiness goes away. The grumpiness is there only when we are trying to live life as if this day or the days of our period are the same as any other day. That's where the grumpiness comes, and that's where both men and women are bumping against each other. So if we start to speak of our needs, and if we can be met by our men, then the benefit would be mutual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd love to move on now to just ask a bit more about perimenopause and menopause.
Yes, yes.
Because this is now an area that you're focusing on a bit more.
Yes.
You speak of this transition as a spiritual journey. I'm sure there are many women who will watch this who will think, all I'm experiencing is hot flushes, dry vagina, temper tantrums, blah, blah. Give us your perspective on that.
So, again, going back to indigenous cultures, what their take is on menopause is that the women in menopause are women who hold their blood and their wisdom within. So there is a quote I want to speak from one of the tribes. I don't know which tribe it comes from, but it's from one of the Native American tribes that says that on her first blood, a girl, a young woman meets her power. During her cyclical years, she practices her power. And at menopause, she becomes her power. So if during our cyclicity, during our cycling years, we have connected to the spirit world every time we bled and shed the inner lining of our womb, at menopause and beyond, we have that thinness of the veil, that connection all the time. There is no need anymore to flow in order to connect with inner guidance, with intuition, with spirit. But it's something that becomes accessible to us. And in indigenous cultures, the clans of the 13 grandmothers that led the tribe spiritually were of women who were post-menopause. So the elders, the council of elders that were men, were dealing with the day-to-day affairs of the tribe, but the grandmothers, the council of grandmothers, were the most revered, and they were women post-menopause who were the spiritual guides of the tribe. So again, the symptoms are calling us to pay attention. So my image of perimenopause and menopause is that the clock that we had that was ticking for 40 some years, I think of it as a grandfather clock that, the pendulum was swinging for years, and slowly it begins to slow down and slow down until it stops. So the symptoms are not a requirement. In the same way that we don't have to have symptoms when we bleed, we don't have to have symptoms when we are in perimenopause and menopause. And in most indigenous cultures, there are no hot flashes, and most of the symptoms we know of do not exist there. So partly these are due to our stress mostly and to our nutrition, but also they are part of our anticipation. There is so much cultural anticipation that you're going to be experiencing that, and we're ready for you with medication, that what else would you do but experience that? And the body is calling our attention to shift from cyclicity to an inner stance of power. So what hot flashes are, the way that I see them is that they're power surges and that women can ride the fire. So it's not something that we need to necessarily medicate. We can learn how to use that fiery energy as the eye of the storm as a transformation that allows us to go through the gate and move from one side of the river to the other side. So again, it's a perspective of how you look at it. If you immediately reach for a medication, then we lose the lesson, we lose the wisdom, we lose the inspiration that can come from that.
Do you teach any techniques to deal with these, or is it, again, as before, about listening and understanding and going within? Or do you say, oh, well, there's this breathing technique that you can use, there's this cream you can put on, whatever?
Not really. I have not had any creams. I didn't use anything. I do a lot of guided visualizations. So I do take women into shamanic journeys or guided journeys internally, but I don't prescribe. I don't know much of that. I didn't need those myself, and it's not my realm to deal with it as a physicality only. It's not where I go with it.
And if someone's watching this and they're having terrible, terrible symptoms, experiencing any of the nature of things, feeling maybe a little bit hopeless or perhaps a little bit resistant to hearing what you're saying because you make it sound so simple and amazing, what would you say to her?
Well, I would say to her that we can change our mind about that. That if she were to stop for a moment freaking out about it, and when a symptom comes, whichever it might be, night sweat or hot flash or headache or rage, to stop and to ask, what is the message here? What does my body want me to know? What does my soul want me to know? It is, if you think of rapids, when you're in water and you're in rapids, the thing that will get you drowning the fastest is to try to get yourself out of there, get yourself away from the rapids. What really works for people to save themselves from rapids is to allow themselves to be swirled by the water and to be taken to shore. So rather than seeing the symptoms as the enemy and doing everything in our power to stop them and combat them and try to, abort them, to really meet them with curiosity. It can't be worse than fighting them. It can't be worse than if a woman, you're asking about a woman who's really suffering. So meeting the symptoms and seeing curiously about what they might have to say to her can't be worse than what she's experiencing already. So what is already been tried and doesn't work is not going to work if we do more of the same. So we have to try and meet it in a different way.
I love that image you gave, because actually, funnily enough, I was writing about my own experience recently, and I said it feels to me as if I'm in this swirl of water that's kind of going down a plug hole, and I have no choice but to surrender to it. That's kind of how it feels.
Yes.
2 more questions. What's your opinion on HRT?
HOT, we'll probably call it something else in the
Hormone
States.
replacement therapy,
Oh,
which
that.
is often doled out to so many women, or antidepressants actually over here. It's like, oh, you're having menopause, have HRT, have antidepressants.
I think about it the same, I feel about it the same way as I feel about menstrual suppression pills.
Yeah.
So my thinking of that is that what if we wanted to find techniques to stop the rain because it's inconvenient to go out when it's pouring, So because it's inconvenient to us, let's stop the rain. So think of the effect that would have within a few seasons. Life would cease. There would be nothing. So it's the same with trying to suppress menstruation or to suppress menopause or to bring hormones. I mean, it is a woman's choice. I don't go for it, and I don't have judgments. I don't want to judge women who do, but it is really my desire to invite women to live their natural cyclicity and the natural slowing down of their process and their transformational process into wisdom, because these are our wisdom years, in a way that is in sync with their inner wisdom rather than with the pharmaceutical companies.
How do you see women change? You've done so many workshops around the world. What does it change for women?
What does what change for me?
Well, taking your workshops or working with you, what changes do you see?
I see women starting to accept themselves more. I see women starting to accept their body more and worry about how they look less. I see them starting to take care of themselves more than they ever did. I see them starting to model self-care to their daughters. I see them settling into themselves a little bit more, stopping this very rigid race to be who they're not, to become something else, to be more like men. I see them soften into themselves and be able to lead and be able to be strong from that softness inside, because it's a different way of leading and it's a different way of being powerful when we include all of our facets and all of our aspects in it. So that's what I see.
In closing, I'd love to ask if you have a parting message for anyone who will be watching this.
So I think we live in times when we have the opportunity and the responsibility to heal ourselves as well as be a model for the girls' generation that's growing up and for the girls who are not yet born. That in indigenous cultures, women modeled self-care, and the girls knew that from just watching their moms and their aunts and their grandmothers and everyone around them. In the recent generations, we have been rigidified, and our moms weren't welcome, their grandmothers weren't welcome, so that legacy have been passed down. And we have a double task here, because in order to empower our girls, we have to heal ourselves. So what I'd like to leave women with is the real opportunity that we have to be this bridge generation where our healing is not only going to help us, but it is going to radiate and reflect and have ripples to our daughters, our granddaughters, and the generations of the girls to come. And I believe that we are the generation that will do it.
That's such a beautiful parting message. I'm just feeling that energy just spreading right out into the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, DeAnna. It's just been amazing to catch you as you're flying around Europe. Very, very blessed, and I look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
And thank you so much for watching, and join me again next time on Heart to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari.